what we are looking to do here in this session for the next 40 odd minutes is talk about the infrastructure at the ports in terms of fleet operations, in terms of the bunkers and the terminals to enable this decarbonization or reduction of the GHG emissions, going beyond carbon as was established in the previous session. So it gives me an immense pleasure to welcome the 5 speakers on stage. So if I can have a quick introduction, let me do the honors on that. So starting from my left with Milind, leftmost with Milind. So Milind is the CEO for Mysore Ammonia, which was established about 50 years ago in 1977, headquarters in Mumbai. And Mysore Ammonia is a leading manufacturer and exporter of ammonia products across the entire spectrum. And the company operates, of course, across India and Sri Lanka with over 3,000 metric tons per month worth of capacities. So a force to reckon with. Last year, Mysore Ammonia signed an MOU with the Avada Group. Of course, Narendra ji is here as well. So that's great to know that the companies on the merchant space as well as yours in the midstream space are active to look at handling all of the ammonia in the midstream. So thank you again and welcome, Milind. Moving on to Daljit. Mr. Daljit Singh Kohli is our friend, India representative from the Port of Antwerp, Bruges. Port of Antwerp, I don't think needs any introduction, one of the largest ports in the world. In terms of the capacity, it has 1,400 companies empaneled and operating within itself. And it's a large chemical cluster in Europe as well. So the ARA region, of course, has been quite prominent with Rotterdam as well as Antwerp, Bruges in terms of its presence, let's say, within the entire ports and maritime story, so to speak. It has, the port, I believe, has 277 million tons worth of cargo throughput, and that makes it one of the largest ports in the world. Thank you, Daljit, and welcome as well. Prasad's a general manager at Anglo Eastern. Anglo Eastern is a large fleet operator, independent ship management services company, and this particular entity oversees 700 vessels. And it gives me particular pleasure to invite him on stage because he, the ammonia-fired ship that he was talking about was operated by my previous company, Fortescue. So it gives me pleasure to see you speak and looking forward to hearing you as well. Thank you, Prasad. Ajay Singh from DNV, Head of Maritime Advisory. Again, DNV doesn't need any large introduction, so I'll keep it very brief. It's an international accredited registrar and classification society, headquartered, of course, in Norway. Large presence across the world, 15,000 plus employees, I believe. Over 350 offices across the world, pretty much, in 100 countries. So plenty of exposure, let's say, to just shipping space that you have. So again, welcome to the panel. And Prakriti, great to see you as well here. Chief India Representative at the Methanol Institute. This was founded in 1989, I believe. The Methanol Institute serves as a global trade association for the methanol industry, over 100 members at the moment. And this, of course, as the name suggests, represents leading methanol producers across the entire spectrum, distributors, technology companies, handling entities, and the likes, with offices across the world as well. So fantastic panelists, welcome on stage. And I hope to spend the next 35 odd minutes in 4 different sections, or let's say subsections within the panel discussion. The first on drivers within the maritime space. What drives GHG reduction, decarbonization as a part of it. The second on the enabling infrastructure. What's actually required at ports within fleet operations to achieve these decarbonization or GHG reduction targets. The third is our favorite subject on regulations, with the MEPC vote next week expected in either direction. The regulations form a large part of our driving force, so we'll talk a little about that. And with the presence of ports such as Antwerp, Bruges, I would personally love to learn what the learnings would be, let's say, from the European ports operations for ports in India. So let me do my best in terms of moderating this session as a non-shipping expert, but would love to hear from you all a lot more. So first on drivers. What really drives the maritime sector towards both decarbonization, reduction of CO2 emissions, as well as the CO2 equivalents as well? So where can green fuels help this, and what really drives this? Compliance or commercials or voluntary decarbonization, for instance. So if we can start, let's say from Milind. Why don't you tell us a little about your experience in this space and what you think drives decarbonization here?
Yeah, thanks Arjun for the introduction. Just like to clarify, I represent the midstream part of the Mysore ammonia business. So Mysore ammonia actually is a large downstream player in the Indian market, and the business that I represent, which is the midstream part of the business, that was set up about 3 years back. So just wanted to clarify that. Now to your question, Arjun, so our business in the midstream space is focused on developing infrastructure at ports for handling of ammonia. And as you know, ammonia as a fuel is something that the shipping industry is looking at as one of the pathways for decarbonization. So from our perspective, our role comes as an enabler in facilitating that decarbonization. Besides this, I think my co-panelist here from DNV and Anglo Eastern should be able to talk more about what other drivers exist for decarbonization of the shipping sector. Of course, from my understanding, transition to green fuel is one of the important elements that should help in decarbonization, because all other pathways, I think, are pretty much in motion at the moment, and it is the transition to green fuels which is expected to lead the pathway to full decarbonization going ahead. So maybe I'll just pause here.
No, thanks, Milind. Thanks for the clarification as well. Prasad, what are your thoughts? What drives decarbonization in this space?
Okay, to start with, just one question I would like to raise. Any idea how much is maritime industry contributing to the global greenhouse gas emission, percentage-wise? 3%. And how much is the cattle industry or the beef industry contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions globally? It is 10 to 18%. Yeah, correct. But cattle industry, especially the, how to say, the dairy farms and the beef industry, especially in US, 10 to 18%. So roughly 6 times of maritime industry. I don't know what they are doing about it, but coming to maritime, so what is driving? Number one, do the ship owners have a great love for environment? Some of them may, but not everyone. But what is driving is the regulations which have come first in European Union. There are 2 regulations mainly. One is, I'll be very brief without throwing much jargons. One is EU ETS, and second is Fuel EU Maritime Regulations. So EU ETS started somewhere in 2024. And 1st Jan 2025, Fuel EU Maritime Regulations have come in. So how does it impact ship owners? So basically, when we talk about ETS, the amount of fuel that you burn, okay, whatever fuel it may be, fossil fuel you burn, you emit greenhouse gas. So how much fuel you burn, you have to pay a tax. Okay, the more fuel you burn, the more tax you pay. Now, is it applicable to all ships? It is applicable to only those ships which are going to European Union. So if you are going from outside European Union to European Union, you have to pay only 50% of the emissions will be taxed. And within European Union, 100% of the emissions will be taxed. In addition to that, there is another tax. Okay, now this is coming to regarding Fuel EU Maritime Regulation. Now what they have stipulated, they have come up with a concept called as greenhouse gas fuel intensity. So basically, there is a responsibility given to the operators that you have to reduce the fuel intensity over a period of time. So every 5 years, there's a slot you have to reduce. Otherwise, you have to pay penalties. And if it is business as usual case scenario, if they don't do anything about it, most of the shipping companies will be bankrupt. Okay, again I repeat, only for ships going to European Union. If the ship is not going to European Union, they are not bothered. So is IMO also coming up something like this? Yes, in MEPC 83, which is going to happen next week, they are talking about 2 aspects. One is the technical measures, and another is the levy part, commercial measures, financial measures. So technical measures, they want to draft standards for all the new alternate fuels. Because we don't have standards for all the fuels. LNG has a standard, methanol has just recently come up with a standard, but we don't have precise standards for ammonia, hydrogen, etc. So they want to have a simplified, standardized system. So that will pass through. Second one is the levy part. Now there is, I think Rolf mentioned it in brief in the previous session. So basically, levy part, there's going to be a mixed argument. So most of the countries, some of the countries have agreed that amount of fuel you burn, just like EU ETS, you have to pay a tax. Now there's a big discussion, like major countries, you know, like Singapore, they have come up with a unique solution saying that you will have to pay tax only if you are using, if you are not using zero or near zero carbon fuel. So the point is, do we have zero or near zero carbon fuel? The answer is not yet. Okay, and when we are talking about zero carbon fuel, it is the complete life cycle analysis from well to wake. So these are what is driving the maritime industry for decarbonization, because they are being punished. So ship owner, as it is, they run, they are walking a very tightrope, very small margins. In addition to that, this will again contribute to additional expenses, and eventually this will be passed on to the consumers, and this will drive up inflation. Okay, I hope I have answered your question.
No, well said, Prasad, in terms of, the challenges, let's say, within the regulations, especially where zero carbon fuel or near zero carbon fuel supply is still non-existent at scale in terms of, the cost gap, the supply issues, and therefore, that's something which the shipping space doesn't want to necessarily grasp with. Ajay, do you agree? And beyond the stick that Prasad was talking about in terms of the regulations, the emissions trading scheme in the EU, is there a carrot at all for decarbonization within the shipping space?
Absolutely. I totally agree with what Mr. Prasad said. I'm not sure how many people are from the shipping industry here, but just to let you know that, there are, of course, international regulations driving the maritime decarbonization, but there is a domestic regulations as well. I'll not touch about what already Mr. Prasad said about IMO, EU ETS, and Fuel EU. I'll talk about Harit Sagar and Harit Nauka guidelines, which is Government of India have recently published. So Harit Sagar is for the ports, which promotes the green fuel, clean fuel in the port. And Harit Nauka guidelines is for the vessels which are inland waterways. As per the Government of India's publication, 50% of the reductions for the inland ships should be by 2035, and by 2045 it will be 100%. So this is apart from the international regulations, which is for the domestic I'm talking about. So that's what my feedback is. Yeah.
Prakriti, if I can move to you, just keeping on to the same topic in terms of, pathways or the availability, let's say, of fuels, right? You represent the Methanol Institute, so I won't ask you about other fuel pathways, but when it comes to decarbonization and reduction of beyond carbon, there are indeed several pathways to get there. People are talking about LNG, people are talking about biofuels, electrified fuels, for instance, including e-methanol or e-methane and the rest. And then ammonia comes later because of the challenges in handling it. But when it comes to methanol in specific, which is obviously of your interest, how quickly do you see Indian ports having the supply at scale for methanol for the shipping sector? How ready are we?
So first of all, I would thank Arjun for inviting me here and the Green Hydrogen organization. To point out to the question, obviously we represent the methanol industry. Looking at the availability is a big challenge when it comes to green fuels, be it hydrogen, be it ammonia, or be it methanol. Definitely there is a challenge, and we as an organization are trying to find the solution to the chicken and egg situation, which we usually cater to. In terms of availability, at this point of time, the production capacity of India, domestic production capacity of India lies at about 0.8 million tons. That's the production capacity of conventional methanol. I'm not even going to green methanol. And the demand stands at 2.88 million tons. So you can see the gap. And the rest of it is being met by imports. So there's a heavy reliance on imports. And coming to your question, which was previously asked in terms of what are the drivers, I think one driver that I would like to point out would be to look at how they could reduce their import bill. That was the biggest reason why also the Indian Methanol Economy Program by Niti Aayog was launched back in 2016. And the major reason was to ensure security, energy security. So I think that is also one of the ways to look at beyond compliance. But when it comes to availability, conventional methanol, yes, there is. And I can quote that currently biomethanol is the segue at this point of time. And close to about 2 million tons of production capacity is under operation around the world. So yes, we do see this scope, but we also need to identify challenges. And I think one of the biggest reasons why the country is moving towards methanol would be to obviously reduce the imports and look at how they can ensure energy security.
You know, thanks for bringing the import bill and the dollar exposure and the geopolitics behind all of this, Prakriti. So appreciate that particular point. Daljit, if I can maintain the same topic with you in terms of the infrastructure readiness, what Prakriti mentioned in terms of, you know, there's a gap, let's say, in the Indian context of production with demand. Is it the same in Europe, and what is the Port of Antwerp, Bruges doing to bridge that gap in terms of demand and supply?
Okay, thanks Arjun, and thank you for inviting us for this session. You know, just giving a background, and I'll just come back to the earlier question that you raised on the drivers. I think there is a driver for us also to actually become decarbonized. Is that Antwerp, if you know, is one of the largest integrated chemical clusters in Europe, and the whole cluster is actually based in the port. So we are an industry-led cluster. Now that actually means that a lot of emissions happen in the port area. That includes, we got the Total, which has got the biggest refinery. We got ExxonMobil having a refinery. We have the chemical cluster, including the companies like BASF, Lanxess, everyone having real production there. Plus you are a port, so you actually have a lot of maritime transport or maybe marine traffic that comes into your port every day. So a lot of emissions happen in the port area, and if you look at the emissions numbers, we did around 17 million tons of carbon dioxide production every year. That's a huge number. So the first target is to actually reduce that to 50% by 2030. That's our main target. And we also tend to become carbon neutral by 2050. So that's driving a lot of initiative for us. When I say us, is basically the whole, you know, the port, because we are a port authority. We are a landlord port, so most of the operations are done by private companies. All the terminals in the port are run by companies like DP World, PSA, MSC. They own the terminals. But we act as a community builder. We try to bring them together and see where we can actually get everyone together to make sure that this decarbonization goal is achieved. Now, coming back to your point about the demand and supply, as I mentioned, we already have a demand of the greener fuels in the port. There's already the grey fuels that have been used. They're trying to convert that into green fuels. That's already there in the port. We have identified sectors, particularly the industry, the refineries, and the maritime are going to be the major drivers. Particularly the refineries, we heard in the morning, are going to really drive along with maritime. Industry will still take time to cope up depending upon how the cost factor works on. So that's talking about the demand we have it. We tend to become the gateway, so we are putting up a lot of infrastructure in place. That means we also are putting up a lot of storage terminals, we're putting up pipelines. When we had a chemical cluster, we already have an existing infrastructure in place to actually transport a lot of chemicals. For example, we have 1,000 kilometers of pipeline just in the port area to transport almost 50 different varieties of chemicals, out of which one pipeline is specifically dedicated for hydrogen. And this is a private network by Air Liquide, but there is a kind of they're trying to put up more infrastructure in place. So we actually put up a roadmap, if I just add up to that, till 2030, in actually combining it in 3 phases. One is supply, one is talking about infrastructure, and the third one is offtake. And we have actually defined elements as port in different phases of it. Like for supply, we look at local production of hydrogen in the port area. We already have a couple of projects that are there and all. We also look at capturing a lot of carbon dioxide to look at the CCUS projects. We're also putting up a project on converting that captured carbon dioxide to methanol. So those projects are on the supply side of it. Plus, outside the scope of this, we are looking at imports. And that's going to be one of the major drivers why we are setting that whole infrastructure, because Port of Antwerp, Bruges is one of the largest ports in Europe after Rotterdam. We are the second largest. And both of us actually trying to set up a similar infrastructure to really look at how we can import these molecules into this. When it comes to the infrastructure side of it, we already have these terminals who are trying to expand capacities in terms of the storage. We are also having a lot of companies trying to set up this cracker facility. There is an ammonia cracker facility that's been set up. There is a hydrogen cracker facility that's been set up. So these things are already on. For example, last month, I think we had the first demo plant of demo cracker facility for air liquidity that started. And they also have funding available for the next one to go up till 2028 to scale up their operations. So this is only on the infrastructure side of it. But there is also a consumption that is there in-house for us, which means that the industry definitely is there, the maritime is there. We also have our own fleet and we lead by example. So we have the first hydrogen tug in the world that we've built it for Port of Antwerp, Bruges. We have one which runs on methane. So these are our internal fleets that run on. Plus we are also encouraging companies to really set up their internal infrastructure equipments on running on hydrogen. So those are really the three pillars that we're talking about when it comes to the demand and supply and the infrastructure setup there.
No, fascinating, Daljit. Thank you for giving giving Port of Antwerp Bruges' perspective in terms of meeting the supply, especially within the chemical cluster that you have there. If I can continue with you and then bring in Milind as well, the midstream element, and you did mention ammonia cracking and the integration, let's say, with the European hydrogen backbone, the HB over there. What role is the Port of Antwerp Bruges playing today in terms of cracking the ammonia that is shipped into your port and using, or rather, let's say, collecting the hydrogen from there through cracking and then pumping the cracked hydrogen back into the grid? What role does your port play in facilitating that space? And Milind, if you can answer that in terms of handling ammonia at ports as well. So Daljit, over to you first.
Yeah, thank you. I think I mentioned that we do have an existing pipeline right now. When I say about this whole distribution that will happen, one is obviously it's companies who are setting up this cracking facility, include companies like Air Liquide, Vopak, Advario. These are actually setting up the cracker facility, and plus these are open access terminals as well as cracking facility they are going to set up. So it will be open for all. Currently the Air Liquide facility, the pipeline that we have is private network, but Fluxes is also setting up an open access pipeline. And so I'll just brief you again going back to what we're doing right now. Port of Antwerp till 2022 was just Port of Antwerp. 2022 we merged with the Port of Zeebrugge. Now the joint entity is called a Port of Antwerp Bruges. Now there are two locations. One is Zeebrugge port and the Port of Antwerp. They are 100 kilometers apart. So this whole pipeline that is going to be set up is actually going to be starting from Zeebrugge, connecting Antwerp and getting two ports to actually import that whole ammonia that is coming in. Plus there is a daughter company which is called Pipelink that is going to set up an ammonia pipeline, again an open access by 2028. Now the first pipeline of Fluxes is going to connect the two ports, plus it will actually get into German hinterland by 2030. So that's the kind of distribution we're setting up. Apart from this, we are a multimodal port. So currently we're also expanding our barge and rail network, which actually means that there'll be alternative modes of transportation for all these fuels that are coming up. Now coming back to the cracker part of it that you're talking about. So these facilities that are going to be there are run by, are already funded, and actually they've just got secure funding. Vopak and Advario are going to get into FID by early next year. So those things are going to come up, and as a port we play that role about building up that whole infrastructure in unison with the whole community that's there in the port.
Daljit, I'll definitely come back to you in terms of the learnings for India from what the Port of Antwerp Bruges are doing. But Milind, same question to you in terms of the entire midstream segment in the Indian context. Are ports in India equipped to handle liquid infrastructure, both cargo as well as fuel, at the scale that we're talking about, which is all decarbonized fuel?
Yeah, so in India, we've had ammonia handling infrastructure present at various ports, even historically, right? So, and the ports in India have been handling liquid cargo, again, for many number of years. We are one of the large importers of ammonia, one of the very large importers of fuel products. So the liquid handling infrastructure is present adequately across various ports. Of course, the green hydrogen ecosystem is a new ecosystem, and based on that, based on where the production facilities are coming up, new infrastructure needs to be created for handling of products which are either methanol or ammonia, for which ports are developing. And again, like he mentioned, in India, the ports operate mainly as landlords, and they give out jetties to private operators to operate sometimes, and sometimes ports themselves operate jetties. Our role as a terminal operator comes mainly in terms of aggregating the storage requirements of exporters. So earlier again, the way the business model worked in India, we were importers. So the infrastructure was mainly built from import perspective. For exports, the infrastructure will be built slightly differently. And the business model that we are looking at is where we create large facilities which can aggregate the incoming cargo from various producers. And then that cargo moves by a dedicated pipeline to the jetty, which can be owned by either a private operator or the port itself, and then gets put on the vessel, and then it moves out of the country. We don't see the requirement for crackers here because we are not going to be importing ammonia. We are very likely only going to be an exporter. So we're not factoring that, at least in our business plans at the moment.
No, completely agree. Crackers would be more on the importing side of things as well. So agree on that front. If I can continue with you and follow on something that you mentioned, when it comes to green ports, let's say when it comes to ports with green fuel, is it a better business case to retrofit an existing port operations and enhance it with green fuel enablement, or would it be better to have a greenfield port altogether, with green fuel supply?
So whether it is green or grey, we are basically talking about handling of methanol and ammonia, which are two chemicals which our ports already handle. What we need to do is design it differently for export and also have larger capacity, because we are talking about much higher volumes than the volumes currently being handled. So in India, for example, the largest storage facility that is present at any port is for ammonia is at Paradip, which is about near Paradip. Actually, it's not even at the port, it's close to Paradip. That's about 70,000 tons, which is inside IFCO's plant at Paradip. For export, you need probably a facility which is much larger than that, because when we receive imports, a vessel that brings cargo, it discharges that cargo at multiple ports. It's a multi-port discharge. When we are sending out cargo, it will be typically a vessel which will load cargo from one port itself. In case of an MGC, about 25-30,000 tons. In case of VLSCs, which are on the annual, 50,000 ton plus, which means you need that kind of storage space minimum at every port. So that is the kind of infrastructure that needs to be built, which today doesn't exist. So I don't think retrofitting is a possibility. This infrastructure needs to be built afresh. Yeah.
No, thank you. So greenfield versus, let's say, retrofits. So that's a good takeaway from there. Moving on to, let's say, the regulation. Moving on to regulations. We spoke about this in the previous session that the the 83rd MEPC meeting is next week, where the pathways for net zero fuel, for instance, will be talked about and voted upon as well. So Ajay and Ajay and Prasad, perhaps the both of you, if I can ask either of you to start talking about what your expectations are from this vote, and if it is indeed a positive vote where the let's say the decarbonization targets, or let's say the net zero targets are enhanced with a shorter timeline, how ready are Indian ports and the Indian maritime supply chain to respond to that regulation?
Yeah. So let me, I don't know how many of you know about MEPC, which is, the full form is Marine Environmental Protection Committee. And they basically sit and discuss about the environmental issues with regards to the marine ecosystem. So this meeting will be held next week, which is from 7th of April to 11th of April, and then there will be a voting system in the end. So this meeting will be in the headquarters of IMO in London. So my expectation from this MEPC 83, which is coming next week, would be on 2-3 things here. Number one, I would like to see about the carbon levy thing, which Mr. Prasad mentioned about. I want to understand and see, because the carbon taxes will be based on the people who are emitting more, and that money will be used for the innovations of the green fuel. So we need to see what sort of taxes they deploy, and then what sort of innovation funding they will be providing. So this is my first expectations from them. Second would be to see how they amend the Annexure 6 of the MARPOL. I'm talking about Annexure 6, which is air pollution prevention requirement of the ship, basically. So this is my second understanding. And the third will be, I want to see about the marine plastic litters, because there will be regulations for the marine plastic litters, which is happening from the ship. So there would be some guidelines for the same as well. So I want to see my expectations from MEPC to maybe have more details about all those things, which I just mentioned. Yeah, Prasad, over to you.
Yeah, just to add to that, in fact, I had a chat yesterday evening with a few of our colleagues in London, So their observation and their feedback was most likely what is going to happen in MEPC is that levying of this tax, that is not going to happen because global ship owners, and it's not restricted only to the ships which will apply to Europe, it will be global. So it will have a big economical impact. Rather, what is going to happen most likely is that they are going to promote carbon trading system. So there will be concept of banking, borrowing and pooling. So those ships which are comply, they have surplus compliance, they can bank or they can sell it. So that is going to happen most likely. So the ship owners will not be, punished, for running the ships. That is what is going to happen. And the bigger elephant in the room that what we are worried about is, globally, there are more than 250,000 seafarers who need to be trained with the usage of alternative fuel. When we talk about alternative fuel, theoretically fantastic, zero carbon fuel, methanol, low carbon fuel, hydrogen, zero, ammonia, zero. But these fuels are quite dangerous. And I can say for that because I'm a seafarer originally, quit sea about 12, 13 years back and working in the office side. I have sailed on LNG tankers, LPG as well as ammonia. Ammonia, I don't know how many of you have first-hand experience. The smell, if few drops of ammonia spill here, all of you will run away. It's very pungent. You know how it smells? Anyone, any guesses? If you visit a urinal which has not been cleaned for few months and regularly used, it smells worse than that. That is ammonia. Plus, to add to that, it is highly toxic. Okay? Methanol, is it very safe? It is not. That is also toxic. Even if you get contact with the skin, it can percolate into the body, it can cause toxicity effect. If somebody ingests large quantity of methanol, the first action that will happen is, within few hours, the person will become blind. And it is a non-reversible process. Further synthesis in the body, metabolism in the body, it can cause death, fatality. So these are very dangerous fuels that we are talking about. So handling them, so of course, the machineries will be quite sophisticated, the ships will be sophisticated, total different systems. So the seafarers on board ship will be actually running the ships. They have to be trained. Do we have training infrastructure developed globally? The answer is a big no. Are there regulations in place? This is again a very big chicken and egg story. Because the ships are coming in quickly before the regulations have come. Primary reason, because it is having a commercial impact. Okay, right now the regulations that we have is only for LNG as marine fuel. There's a code which is called as IGF code, which caters to low flashpoint fuel. It only talks about LNG. So integration of ammonia, methanol and hydrogen is happening, discussions are going on in the IMO. In fact, I am part of the same work group also. But the earliest methanol will get integrated into IGF would be end of 2027. Ammonia maybe 29-30. Hydrogen we don't know. Interim guidelines for methanol as marine fuel has been approved, not yet integrated. Ammonia, they are going to work on it. They want to revisit. Hydrogen, not even work has started. So these are, this is a very big elephant in the room. No guidelines in place, no structure for training. So for training of seafarers, we have something known as STCW guidelines, Standards for Training of Certification of Watchkeepers. Does it talk about all this? No. So there is an urgent need to develop training curriculum and guidelines for seafarers. So training of seafarers who run the ships and training for the management team behind the scenes. Even they have to be trained, understanding the system. And shipping industry typically is a very laid back. For those who are from Indian Navy will agree to me. Typically the combustion engines that we are having, it's 100-year-old technology. When the diesel engine started, not much has happened. I can vouch for that because I'm a seafarer myself, ex-seafarer. All that we had in last 25 years was a bit of automation and we had electronic engines. That's it. Now it is too fast, too soon. So everybody is very badly shaken up, including the shipping companies, all the stakeholders. And classification societies, they are playing a major role in helping the industry. They are guiding, supporting the industry with the knowledge base, etc. But regulatory part, we are not yet ready. So this is a very tricky situation,
Thanks, Prasad, for that on-ground reality check in terms of how ready we are. We've spoken a lot about the shipping decarbonization story as such all day today. But getting this from you as an ex-seafarer is very, very important as a reality check in terms of how ready fleet operators are, for instance, to go this route. Prakriti, if I can ask you to respond, to some of the concerns that that Prasad has raised in terms of the readiness here, talent-wise, our regulations and responding to those regulations. What's Methanol Institute doing to enhance that capacity with between your members?
So I think we have had multiple interactions in the past with Mr. Prasad as well. And it's very important that he mentioned, the elephant in the room. We need to address that. And he rightly pointed out that, there are no regulations on board, but there are engines on board. So how do you so there's definitely that needs to be addressed would be the training part. And we do get a lot of questions in terms of, commercial, but what exactly is the scenario for India? And as Methanol Institute, we do our own part in terms of policy advocacy, sensitizing, training. We have our own safety manuals that we provide. We do also do a lot of workshops around sensitizing not just the seafarers, but also the industry, which is also very important. That's also the starting point for us. So I think these are the areas we try to tackle in terms of understanding how would it fit well. Being a global trade association, we not only look at global policy levels, but we also look at inwards. Suppose I would like to include one example, which is we are working with the DG Shipping and also working with the inland waterways. When you talk about domestic priorities, the domestic priorities are very different when it comes to handling, training. It's very, very different. Becoming a bunkering hub is separate. You would require different infrastructure. You would require different kind of personal training as well. Because methanol is being traded as a cargo, it's in use. But we need to also look at how methanol as a fuel would be utilized. The training would be very, very different. So yes, we do our part in terms of having these workshops. We do a lot of information exchange programs as well with the embassies, with the ministries, all together in alliance, because we need to coordinate with different ministries. But I would say, yes, there's definitely a need, which is not being talked about beyond the supply and chicken and egg situation. We also need to think about how well the maritime industry is well equipped and prepared to move forward with any alternative fuel that you talk about.
Daljit, is Europe doing things better than what you would want India to do? And what are the learnings there?
I think, Europe ports particularly are slightly ahead of what we are doing right now. We just started 2 to 3 years back, and somebody just mentioned in the morning that before 3 years back, nobody was talking about India. So if you see the government policies that have come in the last couple of years has actually made the world look at it. But there is obviously a possibility that India could learn a lot from the developments that are happening in the Europe market. For example, one of the main things that we need to look at is how do we set up our infrastructure. And this is just not only about talking about the green hydrogen infrastructure, the overall infrastructure. You've seen a shift happening in the last couple of years, but then definitely there is a lot of room that needs to be done. We're just talking about transportation from particular 3 ports that we have identified for the green hydrogen, that is Kandla, Tuticorin, and Paradip. What is the infrastructure to actually make sure that the production, now that there is land allotted to those ports and there will be a lot of infrastructure that we set around that. But that infrastructure will also need to cater to some of the local industries. So how do we transport that to the local markets here? We as a port have an industry in the port. That's a plus point that you look at. But I also have been talking to a lot of state bodies, and the current focus of the government also is to look at how do we develop these industry-led ports. That is something which is going to be changing, a game changer if you look at from a future perspective. Inland waterways, we are really short of that. We need to use our inland waterways. We just use, I think the current transportation that we do is around 3 to 4% max, whereas in Port of Antwerp, Bruges, we do 45%. So that's a big gap that you need to address, and that's the economical mode of transportation, and that could also be used for all the energy transition that is going to come in.
Perhaps closing comments before I open it up for 2 or 3 questions is taking Daljit's points, everyone, and this is a question for all 5 of you in terms of closing comments. The concept of industry-led green hydrogen, or let's say shipping hubs, for instance, let's say, blueprinting the chemical cluster in the Antwerp region into India. Which sector, if I ask you a very specific pointed question, which sector or which industry do you think India can have a shipping hub built around it for example, a petrochemical complex? And where would you see this come up in India? Which port or which state do you see this coming up in India first? Prasad, why don't you start, and then we'll...
Okay, day before yesterday I had a meeting with DG Shipping, and in fact I was appraised that within India we are starting something known as Indian Ocean Center of Excellence. This is IUC Smart. Okay, this is something first in Asia. Okay, and we will develop the ecosystem for training, competency, technical guidelines. And just to add something to that, even though the ships are funded by Europeans, India is playing a very big role. I'll tell you how. The MOL CMB Tech ships, in fact, we are building that ships, Anglo Eastern. The ships are designed by Indians. Of course, they are based in Hong Kong, but very much Indians. Built in China, but under the supervision of Indians. The ships will be manned by Indians. And the Indians, we are writing the rules and regulations. And just to that, I just want, for the benefit of the audience, so there is a ammonia guide, there's an international body called the Society for Gases Marine Fuel, which is writing rules and regulations, competency guidelines for all these alternate marine fuels, ammonia, methanol, LNG, hydrogen, and I am the chairperson for the ammonia fuel committee globally. So as Indians, we are contributing a lot. And remember the seafarers, we are a very big seafarer exporting nation. So we contribute to almost 20% of the global seafarers in the officer category. And we are followed by Philippines. They are the seafarers which are coming from Philippines, they are sailing at the lower ranks. So as Indians and India, we are playing a major role in the entire maritime decarbonization journey, if not directly, but indirectly.
So I would say in terms of sector you asked about, I would say ports act as a catalyst. For any country, it's a gateway. And as we are located in more than 100 countries, we have worked with numerous ports worldwide. While working with Indian ports, there are some of the areas which I believe could be improved, such as the lack of interactions, lack of open platforms. If you speak one of the ports, I don't think so they are sharing openly what they are doing, the best practices, which should be there. And then talking about, there are handling regulations in place. For example, as Prakriti said and Milind said, there are methanol, ammonia, you can handle it. But then what about the ship to ship or truck to ship? So that regulations need to be taken care of by class societies like us, but need to have the joint industry projects with them. So these are few of the things which I believe is required, and instead of talking much, we need to start implementing things. There are lack of pilot projects as well. When we see Norway, there are a lot of pilot projects in place. So we talks a lot on the pilot projects, but I don't think there are much. So these are some areas which I believe need to be improved, and we need the collaboration from each sectors and then industries.
Milind, any thoughts on that as well? What kind of clusters do you see in India?
No, so the way I think the green hydrogen hubs have been conceptualized in India, and the way, government has announced 3 hubs, and there's a 4th one which is Gopalpur, which is coming up naturally because of the availability of favorable ecosystem. So I believe these 3 or 4 places will naturally come up as hubs, and with the presence of consumption ecosystem in around most of these, and presence of manufacturing or production ecosystem for green hydrogen around these. So I believe that these locations are natural contenders to become clusters where we will see development. Plus the availability of very good port infrastructure.
So shipping-led clusters rather than the other way around.
I think India is blessed to have a very good port ecosystem, and the fact that most of these ports can provide access to producers to export their products, and also the fact that some of these ports also have presence of consumers like fertilizer industry. I think that it's a very good coming together of these factors that's going to help drive these hubs going forward. Yeah.
Thanks for the positive comments there. Prakriti, closing comments from your side as well.
So I think one thing that I would like to mention would be Kandla Port in terms of the methanol industry. They've also made announcements in terms of becoming a green fuel bunkering hub, especially looking at methanol. And they recently signed an MOU with Bapu Shipping as well. So I think that's exactly where we need the support from the government and from entities like the Kandla port to look at, how they can move forward. And to be very frank, they've been very progressive in terms of looking at how they can become a bunkering hub, knowing the fact that domestic priorities would be very different. But obviously, they are very, very keen to look at the green corridor system. So that's another priority. But what was also mentioned, which is important, that do you find the availability of methanol? That makes a very good criteria to have that kind of infrastructure. And as it was also mentioned that, I would find certain state ministries as well being very progressive in terms of adopting green fuels, such as Odisha, Kerala. These are the states which have been going far beyond and quite progressive in terms of adopting such green fuel policies. So I think it's also to do with the fact that if you have availability, because in terms of the methanol industry, when you talk about infrastructure, obviously when alternative fuels you would change, but with methanol, it's going to be very, very minimalistic. So I think in terms of our industry, what we're looking at, it's mostly going to be how progressive the policies are in terms of the availability of green methanol.
No, thank you. I think, for those closing comments, everyone. I'll open it to the floor for a couple of questions and then I'll wrap up. Yes. Yes, Karan.
First of all, thank you. And maybe how I look at it is maybe 3 layers of this whole situation right now. One is at the international level, there is IMO, and then there is EU maritime legislation, and then we have these national guidelines. So all have a different narrative altogether. And while we kind of move 2 steps ahead, and then we also have to move a little back because of the other regulations that also comes in place, and the MEPC 83, which will be followed very soon. We all know what is going to happen, and there are some expectations already set in. There might not be any voting, and it will be a consensus maybe. So how do you think whether the whole thing will go hand in hand, and do you think a synchronization happening on that front? Because that is where the whole supply chain is going to enact based on these regulations as well. So this question is open to maybe whosoever wants to answer this. Nothing specific, yeah. Thank you.
Maybe 1 or 2 responses on synchronization.
So I think the regulation only concerns use of alternative fuels for shipping, right? But, that's one of the use cases of these products. The infrastructure needs to get developed in any case for other use cases. So the demand in Europe, the demand in Japan, Korea, for other applications for which India is looking at exports. So in order to address that demand, this infrastructure will anyway come up. Bunkering infrastructure needs to come up hand in hand with as and when those regulations come into play. I mean, that would be my take.
Regarding MEPC, so there are 2 aspects. One is technical aspects and second is commercial aspects. Technical aspects, most of the countries have already agreed. So prior MEPC, we had something known as Intersessional Greenhouse Gas Working Group, which just finished. In fact, this week only. So after that, MEPC happens. So they have already agreed upon the technical aspects. What is a little bit under discussion is the commercial aspects. How to implement levy. Whether everybody agrees to implement levy, or how do you structure the levy. So Singapore has proposed multiple structures for levy. So that is where little bit of discussions and arguments are going to happen. Otherwise, it's all sorted. And there is MARPOL. MARPOL is a code, right? Yeah, MARPOL, marine pollution, it stands for. Remember, earlier days media, if you see oil pollution, it started with that, Exxon Valdez and things like that. So now we are talking about even air pollution. So there's an Annex 6 which talks about marine pollution with regards to air pollution. So they are going to make changes in that annex as far as MEPC is concerned.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karan, for the question. 1 more and then we wrap up. Yes. Yes, Jai Kumar.
Just an add-on to what I was speaking earlier. One part of the infrastructure which not too many people have spoken about yet is coastal shipping. If you're going to be, there was a lot of talk of connectivity being an issue when the manufacturers were talking about it. Bunkering is one part of the infrastructure problem. Transporting it across the country, you might get the fuel manufactured in a certain place. The fastest way, or rather the cheapest way in terms of cost per ton kilometer is shipping if you handle the first and the last mile connectivity. I would like to hear your thoughts on what we need to do. Yesterday we passed the coastal shipping bill, which has been waited. We've been waiting for it for the longest time to regulate the coastal shipping. But do you think there is something more that needs to be done in terms of looking at this coastal shipping as an infrastructure, particularly to deal with green fuel transportation?
Let me take it maybe. Thank you for the question. Back in 2022, DNV published a paper on Indian Coastal Green Shipping Program. I'm not sure if you give me your email address, I can send you that. So in that, we have given certain recommendations to DG Shipping with support of Norwegian Consulate India. What could be the best way moving ahead and to promote the green fuels, particularly for the coastal shipping? And there are so many recommendations, such as you have to set up national targets for, particularly for coastal shipping, not only for vessels which is domestically. There has to be some certain targets for the coastal shipping. And another question is, who's going to reinforce the financial capacity of the coastal ship owners? That is also need to be decided. So I will definitely send you the white paper, and I think you will like it, and this will be really helpful for the understanding of the coastal shipping ecosystem.
Just to add to what he has just said, I just want to emphasize that maritime industry is having a good experience of more than 50 years of handling ammonia and methanol as cargo. Because ammonia, phosphoric acid, these kind of chemicals are used extensively in the fertilizer industry. During my sailing days, I remember carrying ammonia from Yuzhny in Ukraine all the way to this port in India, Paradip, for the fertilizer industry, and also in Vizag. Okay, so it has, and this was 2001 I'm talking about. And even prior to that, the industry is having good experience. Okay, whether it is green fuel or if it is green, let's say we talk about methanol. If it is green methanol, blue methanol, does not really matter. The properties are exactly the same, whether it is ammonia or methanol. All that will require coastal shipping. You will have to have, there's a concept called as proof of sustainability. So how to prove that it is green? When you look at methanol, it is methanol, it's the same chemical. All that differentiates whether it is blue, green, yellow, grey is the proof of sustainability. How much is the CO2 emissions during the production and in the complete life cycle assessment. That is what really matters. So we need to have strong infrastructure with regards to, how to develop this sustainability aspects. Classification societies are playing a major role in supporting the industry with regards to that. But in India, we need to have this. Hardware handling ships, we have experience, except for hydrogen. Hydrogen, carrying it as cargo on a ship is a very tricky affair, because when you have liquid hydrogen, it is super cryogenic, minus 262 degrees centigrade. So it's a totally different ball game altogether. And I don't have time, otherwise I could have explained it. And when we talk about gaseous hydrogen, it's at a high pressure, 600, 700 bar. How much can you carry on a ship? Very limited. So mostly it is going to be LNG, ammonia and methanol. And there is no dearth of knowledge as far as technical aspects are concerned.
I think with that point, I think it's a very good place to close this particular session, taking a few of those points that everyone is mentioning. So it's been a comprehensive set of discussion. We started off talking about regulations, both the Maritime Fuel EU as well as the taxation under the EU ETS scheme. We talked about the regulations, rather we talked about the driver of reducing imports as well, because we are all import dependent, especially in a country like India for shipping fuel. Third, we talked about extensively about the MEPC, the expectations, let's say, from the MEPC vote next week, whether it will happen, in what shape and form. So that's, of course, something on everyone's radar. We talked about the standards or the lack of it. We talked about the availability of zero carbon fuel at scale, or again, the lack of it. And we talked about, let's say, port-led clusters as well, which for me personally is quite exciting. So I think we've covered a whole host of segments within the infrastructure play, but this is a very shallow, and pun intended, shallow discussion, very early stage discussion, I would say, in a very vast ecosystem. So I compliment the speakers in terms of touching upon several different subjects. But then again, looks like we perhaps would have to have a separate dedicated day just for ports infrastructure when it comes to detailing several of these elements out. But this was, at least to me, a brilliant learning, steep learning curve in what ports, shipping, fleet operations involve. And it's great to hear everyone speak. So thank you again to the panelists.